Okay, so now we are going to do a two sample hypothesis test, right? There is not much difference that we need to adjust for, or there's not much difference that we need to learn if we understand the five steps of a hypothesis test. Okay, so if you remember when we started out in doing one sample hypothesis testing, I mentioned that with one sample hypothesis tests, what we're doing is we're comparing a specific population against a specific value, right? So, in other words, excuse me, will it take 5.5 hours or less to fly a plane to Los Angeles? Will the new car electric battery charge in 3 minutes? Will the stock price of IBM be $125 or more? Okay. So for a one sample hypothesis test, we were simply comparing the population parameter against a specific value. Okay. And then we went on to say, all right, so how do we do this hypothesis test? Well, step one, state the null and the alternative, right? Okay. Step two, level of significance. Step three, choose the formula for the test statistic. Step four, determine your critical values. Step five, go, right? Go do the test, right? Compare the test statistic against the critical value, determine whether you're in the region of rejection, the region of non-rejection, and then you should figure out whether it's reasonable or unreasonable to believe your null hypothesis, right? So in other words, if you fail to reject, then you're saying your null hypothesis is reasonable. And if you reject your null hypothesis, then you're saying that it is unreasonable to believe your null hypothesis, okay? Then we went on to look at p-values and we said, okay, all right. So for a p-value, that's just how confident you can be in your results, right? If p is greater than alpha, if the p-value is larger than the level of significance, then you can be very confident in failing to reject the null hypothesis. On the other hand, if p is less than alpha, then you would be very confident in rejecting your null hypothesis. Okay. So, in other words, if P is greater than alpha, you fail to reject the null. If P is less than alpha, you'll reject the null. Okay, that's fine. Those steps, what we did for a one sample hypothesis test, they are almost identical to what we do for a two sample hypothesis test. The only difference, the only thing we're going to do different for a two sample hypothesis test is instead of, well, let me back this up. The only thing we're going to do for a two sample hypothesis test, the only thing we're changing involves step one and step three. Step one, we are no longer testing a population against a specific value. We are testing a population against another different second population. Okay, so in other words, we don't care if the plane gets to Los Angeles in 5.5 hours or less. We just want to know if the trip to Los Angeles takes less time than the trip to San Francisco. We don't care if IBM's stock price is going to be $125 or more. We just want to know if IBM's stock price is greater than Home Depot's. Okay. We don't care if there's going to be, we don't care if the average income level of Jersey City is $100,000. We just want to know, is the average income level of Jersey City the same as Hoboken's? Okay. So that's what we're doing here, right? If you want to compare a population against a specific value, you run a one sample hypothesis test. If you want to compare a population against another population, regardless of whatever the numbers are, That is the point of a two-sample hypothesis test. Okay. And then, of course, if you want to make a range of values likely to contain the mean, right, a lower bound and upper bound, that's a confidence interval, but we're leaving that to the side for now. Okay. So all we have to do is for step one, we have to change around how we state the null and the alternative hypothesis. And then for step three, we have to change our test statistic formula, right? We're going to change the calculation for our test statistic. Now, I mentioned in a prior video that we're no longer going to be doing these by hand, right? A one sample hypothesis test, you could do the calculations by hand. And to be honest with you, you could do the calculations of a two sample hypothesis test by hand. You could. It wouldn't take you that long. It might take you, half hour, something like that. But almost always, we now run one and two sample hypothesis tests on computers. We use Microsoft Excel or Google Sheets, but you should really become familiar with using Excel. That's what the world uses. Okay. So what we're going to do is we are going to run a two sample hypothesis test. We're going to state the null and the alternative, and then we're going to run a two sample hypothesis test using Excel. We're going to see how it actually happens. Okay. So let's go to a screen share. Okay. Let's say that I want to know the relationship between two different bonds. Okay, bonds, US Treasury bonds, right? IOUs, loans. Okay. It's taking a while to load this. Waiting for my whiteboard to come up. Okay. Let's say I want to know the relationship between two different bond prices.